Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's July 25th. Today we remember the founding of a garden that inspired the book Alice in Wonderland. And we'll also learn about the botanist remembered with the Forsythia genus. We'll salute the lake poet who likened plant taxonomy to poetry. And we'll also revisit a diary entry about a garden visitor and a letter from a gardener to her sister. In today's Unearthed Words, we'll feature an excerpt from A July Afternoon by Walt Whitman. And we grow that garden library with a book about the unloved flowers, as they've been referred to, weeds. And then we'll wrap things up with an unforgettable story of flowers and a performance called A Case of Floral Offerings from 1874. But first, let's catch up on some greetings from gardeners from around the world in today's curated news. Well, first up is an email from Priya in Montreal. She sent me pictures of her garden, and her email said, "These are some images from my garden walk today." Priya's garden is a place for relaxation. There's a fernery and a grove of willows. And what I love about Priya's garden is that it proves that you don't need a riot of color for a garden to be beautiful. In fact, there are many designers who believe that you should use restraint and stick to a color scheme in order to avoid having a garden that can look cluttered or weak from a design point. From a visual standpoint, too much variety in color can be overwhelming. Now, in Priya's garden, where the primary color is green, she also doesn't have to worry about transitioning from one garden room into the next. So moving through her garden feels like a very cohesive experience. Now, if you have multiple gardens on your property, and each of the gardens has a very distinct color scheme, what you might want to consider is adding transitional spaces that give your eye a break from the color. So instead of going from the yellow garden directly into the pink garden, you would have this very neutral transitional space. And another way to use those areas of transition is to allow that zone to be a blending of the colors. So you would go from the yellow garden into the yellow and pink transition and then into the pink garden. So just a few ideas for you to consider if you have very distinct color schemes in gardens on your property. Then next up is an email from Jacob H. in Pennsylvania. And Jacob wrote to share a picture of his pine English cottage garden arbor that he built for his wife, Annette. They've been married 37 years this July, and Annette loves to garden. Well, happy anniversary, you two, and congratulations on making a beautiful arbor to match your beautiful garden. Well, that's it for today's Gardener Greetings. Now, if you'd like to participate in the Gardener Greetings segment, just send your garden pictures, stories, birthday wishes, and so forth to me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. That's jennifer@thedailygardener.org. Or you can share your posts in the Facebook group for the show. And don't forget that you can listen to the show while you're at home. Just ask Alexa or Google to play the Daily Gardener podcast, and she will. It's just that easy. Here's today's curated news. Today's post appeared in the LA Times, and it was written by Micah Fluellen. And the title of the post says, "This LA music producer is obsessed with houseplants. See how they amplify his work." Here's an excerpt. Mark Redito is an LA-based electronic music producer who, it turns out, is also the proud parent to over 40 houseplants. He visually couples his earthy, soothing sound with heavy plant imagery, from short snippets of him tenderly caring for plants to abstract videos of 3D modeled flora. Redito's aesthetic is the seamless marriage between the ambient digital world and a tangible natural ecosystem. And if you check on his Instagram account, you can find short teaser videos of thumping tracks playing over footage of sped up plant growth in gardens, photographs of technology blended with nature, and updates of his own garden developments. Now, we all know the love affair that millennials have with houseplants. And Mark Redito is another person that we can add to that list. Mark says, "My hope is that when people listen to my work, they would be inspired to go outside and experience nature or start their own garden." In fact, his upcoming album that'll be released this summer is called Natural Habitat, and it's all about that interconnectedness between us and plants. And I love what Mark said in his post. He was asked to give advice to new plant parents. He said, "Ease into it and remember to take it slow. When I started getting into plants, my collection grew from 5 plants to about 30 in a month. As much as I enjoyed having plants and taking care of them, it was a lot of work for one guy to water and tend to 30 plus plants on one Saturday morning." And isn't that the truth? Anyway, I loved this spotlight on Mark Redito. Now, if you'd like to read it for yourself, all you need to do is search for the word music in the Facebook group for the show, and this post will pop up. And here's an original post that I wrote for the blog about Cleome. You know, the other day I had a memory pop up on my Facebook feed, and it was of my daughter's senior picture photo shoot from last summer. Now, when Emma had her pictures taken, of course, I could not resist bringing along some cuttings from the garden so that we could incorporate them into her photo shoot. In fact, for one of the images, I had her hold just one large white Cleome blossom in her hands. It looked like a giant puffball, and it had a very ethereal quality about it. Cleome has a number of wonderful common names. It's been called spider flower, spider plant, pink queen, or my favorite, grandfather's whiskers. And Cleome comes from the southern hemisphere. Think South America. It's native in countries like Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil. Now, if you use Cleome as a cut flower, just remember that it can get sticky. So keep it in mind if you handle it. Now, I know that there are some gardeners who have no trouble sowing Cleome directly into their gardens, but some gardeners complain that it can be an inconsistent germinator. And I like to sow my Cleome in July since the seeds appreciate intense summer light to get going. And Cleome can get tall, and sometimes it can benefit from staking. I visited a cut flower farm a few years ago, and they supported their Cleome beds with string. So keep that in mind as well. Which leads me to another point. If you have a cutting garden, you're going to want to add Cleome. It's really hard to beat it. The blooms are a show stealer in any arrangement. And Cleome first appeared in gardens in North America, Europe, and England in the early 1800s. Victorian gardeners completely fell in love with the plant, and it became a must-have flower in every cottage garden. Love Cleome. All right, that's it for today's gardening news. Now, if you'd like to check out any of my curated news articles and original blog posts for yourself, you're in luck, because I share all of it with the listener community in the free Facebook group for the show, the Daily Gardener Community. So there's no need to take notes or search for links. The next time you're on Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. On this day in 1621, the Botanic Garden at Oxford, also known as the Physic Garden, was founded at exactly 2 p.m. It was a Sunday. The Oxford Botanic Garden is the oldest garden in England, and when the garden was founded, its main purpose was to be a medicinal garden. Henry Danvers, the first Earl of Danby, funded the garden by giving Oxford University £250. Unfortunately, the land they purchased was flood-prone. The 5-acre tract was essentially pasture land, and it lined the banks of the River Cherwell. So, to protect the garden from flooding, the ground for the garden was built up. And records show that a Mr. Windiot brought in 4,000 loads of muck and dunge to elevate the area that we now know as the Oxford Botanic Garden. During the founding ceremony, dignitaries of the university walked in a procession from St. Mary's Church to the garden. Mr. Edward Dawson, a physician, and Dr. Clayton, the Regis Professor of Medicine, each gave a speech, and a stone was placed in the garden gateway by the Vice Chancellor himself. The Oxford Botanic Garden has a fascinating history, and there are at least 2 father-son connections to the garden. Bobart the Elder and his son Bobart the Younger established the herbarium, and both William Baxter and his son served as curator. Lewis Carroll, who was a math professor at Oxford, visited the garden with a young girl named Alice, which inspired his story, Alice in Wonderland. J.R.R. Tolkien also taught at Oxford. He loved the gardens and could be found sitting beneath his favorite tree, an ornamental black pine. In 1941, after the discovery of the Dawn redwood tree, a Dawn redwood seed was planted in the garden. The giant still grows at the Oxford Botanic Garden. And in 2019, Oxford University's gardens, libraries, and museums attracted over 3 million visitors. And the garden and arboretum had a record-setting year with over 200,000 visitors, which was an increase of 23%. Today, the garden is continuing to prepare for its 400th anniversary in 2021. Planting projects and garden redesigns are all being worked on to give visitors a stunning welcome next year. In fact, some of the beds are going through a bit of a time machine. They're being planted just the way they were back in the 1600s, so that visitors can glimpse how the garden looked when it was established 4 centuries ago. And fittingly, today is the birthday of the Scottish botanist William Forsyth, who was born on this day in 1804, and he trained as a gardener at the Oxford Physic Garden. And when he started at Oxford, he was an apprentice to the chief gardener, Philip Miller. By 1771, William took over as the top gardener. William is remembered for building one of the very first rock gardens at Oxford. He brought in over 40 tons of stone that was collected from land around the Tower of London, and he even imported some pieces of lava from Iceland. This idea resulted in a tremendous amount of effort, and unfortunately, the garden didn't turn out. But William also had some notable successes. He was a founding member of the Royal Horticultural Society, and the genus Forsythia was named in his honor by Carl Peter Thunberg. And in case you're wondering, there are several different varieties of Forsythia, which also goes by the common name golden bell. And the Forsythia is a vernal shrub. Vernal shrubs bloom in the spring. And today is the anniversary of the death of the English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who died on this day in 1834. Along with his friend William Wordsworth, Samuel helped found the Romantic movement in England, and he was also a member of a group of poets called the Lake Poets. And as both a poet and a flower lover, Samuel recognized the inherent rhythm of taxonomy, and he likened it to poetry when he said that taxonomy was simply the best words in the best order. In his poem called Youth and Age, Samuel wrote, "Flowers are lovely. Love is flower-like. Friendship is a sheltering tree." And Samuel wrote a 54-line poem about a Mongolian emperor's summer garden at Xanadu. The emperor was Kublai Khan. Samuel's Kublai Khan is one of his most famous works. In fact, the poem begins by describing Kublai Khan's palace and the garden, contrasted with the setting of an ancient Mongolian forest. And there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree. And here were forests, ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. And it was Samuel Taylor Coleridge who said, "Summer has set in with its usual severity." And it was on this day in 1938 that the Canadian naturalist Charles Joseph Sariel wrote about sharing his garden with a toad. He wrote, "One particular toad has taken quite a fancy to the wildflower garden. His den is alongside the hepatica plant. There he sits, half buried, and blinks up at me while I shower water on him." And finally, on this day in 1946, the garden writer Elizabeth Lawrence wrote a letter to her sister, and I thought you would enjoy it. She wrote, "Dear Anne, I am going to send to you, as soon as they are ripe, some seeds of Campanula americana, which came to me from one of my delightful farm woman correspondents. I asked Mr. Krippendorf if he knew it, and he said yes, it was his favorite weed. Scatter them as soon as you get them along the drive, along the fence at the foot of the terrace, and on the other side near the tiger lilies. Then in the spring, I will send, or maybe fall, some roots of the daylily Margaret Perry. It will spread all along and bloom with the campanula and the lilies. The campanula is an annual, but it will self-sow, and the combination will make a mass of bloom for 6 weeks or more. Then I'm going to send you seeds of Cassia marylandica to scatter lower down on the driveway." And then Elizabeth writes a quote from the book Never Ask the End by Isabel M. Patterson. The virtuous and the beloved dead need neither cassia buds nor myrrh. Then she writes about her amaryllis. I expect that you will have more lycoris. Mine are still coming, and I dash out very quickly to stake each one before Mr. Case can get to it. Mr. Krippendorf wrote that his were coming out fast, but that he didn't expect them to last long, as he was bringing out his granddaughter's boxer to spend a week with his, and he thought the two of them would break off thousands. Mr. Krippendorf feels as I do about dogs, but Bessie does not. The summer has been so cool and green, and so many of the choice and difficult amaryllids have bloomed. She ends this letter with Shakespeare's Sonnet 52. So am I as the rich, whose blessed key can bring him to his sweet uplocked treasure, the which he will not every hour survey, for blunting the fine point of seldom pleasure. In Unearthed Words, here's an excerpt from A July Afternoon by the Pond by the American poet and father of free verse, Walt Whitman. The fervent heat, but so much more endurable in this pure air, the white and pink pond blossoms with great heart-shaped leaves, the glassy waters of the creek, the banks with dense bushery, and the picturesque beaches and shade and turf. The tremulous, reedy call of some bird from recesses, breaking the warm, indolent, half-voluptuous silence. An occasional wasp, hornet, honeybee, or bumble. They hover near my hands or face, yet annoy me not, nor I them, as they appear to examine, find nothing, and away they go. The vast space of the sky overhead so clear, and the buzzard up there sailing his slow whirl in majestic spirals and disks. Just over the surface of the pond, two large slate-colored dragonflies with wings of lace, circling and darting, and occasionally balancing themselves quite still, their wings quivering all the time. Are they not showing off for my amusement? The sky, with silver swirls like locks of tossed hair, spreading, expanding, a vast, voiceless, formless simulacrum, yet maybe the most real reality and formulator of everything. Who knows? I love that it ends that way. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Weeds by Richard Mabey. This book came out in 2012, and the subtitle is In Defense of Nature's Most Unloved Plants. The author, Richard Holmes, said, a witty and beguiling meditation on weeds and their wily ways. You will never look at a weed or flourish a garden fork in the same way again. And if you thought your garden was full of them, this book is chock full of 336 pages of weeds. And it's one of my favorite books on this topic. You can get a copy of Weeds by Richard Mabey and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $14. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. On this day in 1874, the Opelousas Courier shared an incredible story called A Case of Floral Offerings. The story was from Berlin, and it told of an actress who was playing the role of a female Hamlet. She wanted to have bouquets and wreaths thrown to her at the end of her performance. When a man told her that the flowers would cost $20, the actress said that it was too much for one night. But the gentleman had an idea. He said that $20 would be sufficient for 2 nights, and he explained how it would work. He said, "Today, I and my men will throw the bouquets to you from the first tier. After the performance is over, I shall take the flowers home with me in a basket and put them in water. Then tomorrow night, we'll toss them at your feet again. And no one in the audience will know that the bouquets have been used before." Well, the actress loved the man's ingenious plan, and she happily paid the sum that he demanded. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Wyoming, Minnesota with the help of Paige Mance, Brooke Bierbaum, Kiana Rayleigh, Maddie Doyle, Natalie Decker, and Eric Begay. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media. You can follow the show on Instagram, and listeners always have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. All the stories and books that are featured on the show can be found over at thedailygardener.org, thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. Last but not least, you can share your own gardener greetings on the show by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.